world's changing. And you are right in the center of it.
I don't know what's ahead, but all bets are off.
All right, Showtime Championship Boxing. Let's go through this if we can to return to the Mohegan Sun over the weekend. David Benavidez scoring essentially a 10th round TKO, sort of retirement on the stool kind of a thing, over Alexis Angulo. BC, we did the weigh-in shows, and Benavidez missed weight, losing his title on the scales. He was immediately apologetic and sort of had indicated that maybe it was him not having enough preparation, not realizing that with these new COVID protocols, he wouldn't have access to the things he normally had access to. I found that to be look, you still signed the dotted line and said you were going to do the weight and make it, so you're still responsible, but not a crazy excuse. Seems like pretty reasonable. Did he look good enough to redeem himself on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, he looked absolutely fantastic. He looked so good, Luke, and just dominating Angulo. Now, look, Angulo was more raw and more of a limited fighter, but the distance that Benavidez was able to keep so that he never got caught with anything big and then did his typical flair of the flurries. He switched stances this time. I mean, he showed more wrinkles than normal. He redeemed the best he could for what was an embarrassing situation. Certainly, some of the COVID-related parts and the unprecedented nature plays into that. Also, at the same time, what he mentioned was, this isn't me being lazy or unprepared. Maybe I messed up my diet a little bit, but, stamina-wise, preparation-wise, training camp, I'm there. You saw that in the ring, and I think we did, Luke, and that doesn't cover up what he did. He has to pay the price for being unprofessional, ultimately, despite the things against him, and he did. He lost that WBC title for the second time, both times not for things that happened in the ring, but I think he fought well enough where if his reward is inevitably a vacant title bout to try to regain that green belt for the third time, maybe against his original mandatory challenger in Avni Yildirim, the slugger from Turkey, which would be a fun fight, that's not bad. I think this will delay his launch into the unification realm to try to get guys like Caleb Plant in the ring who, they hate each other. We want to see that fight a lot. That will slow that down, maybe put another hurdle in the road. But Benavidez absolutely did what he needed to do, which was handle his business in the ring to sort of mute some of that criticism coming his way.
Yeah, the interesting part about this was what was bothering me to watch. I had the two screens up on Saturdays. He was absolutely tooling Alexis Angulo. I mean, it was competitive in the sense that he took his time and he was patient, and that Angulo was as tough as advertised, right? Okay, that was true. But the whole narrative shifted from he is going to do what he needs to do to set up these big fights. I know he had the mandatory against Yildirim, but the Caleb Plant fights, he was basically planting seeds in the minds of fans and promoters and everybody else that these were fights you needed to see, and he still did that, but the narrative switched to what can he do tonight to make up for what he lost yesterday. And that just sets everything back. So was it the kind of performance where he went in there and just bulldozed him in 4 rounds and knocked him out and blew him out of his shoes to the point where you could just forget everything, and you're making everyone skip all he has a mandatory, when he comes back we'll skip all that, we don't need to worry about that at all, we'll just fast forward him. It wasn't some kind of miraculous experience. It was, as you mentioned, what he needed to do, but the problem was what he needed to do shifted from setting up Caleb Plant to just getting back on the tracks. So while he did that, you can't get around the setback that he put for himself. It's not the end of the world, but it certainly is unfortunate. And at a time when in COVID, promoters of all stripes need their best talents in rotation against their best fighters when possible, this was a bit of an unfortunate one. Still, he looked pretty good. Now, I want to talk about that co-main event, if we can, the vacant interim WBA lightweight title between Rolly Romero and Jackson Marinez. I don't use the word robbery very often, but that was a robbery. In fact, I'm usually one of these folks who says, listen, with the way that scoring works and the kind of latitude that we provide, you need to understand that based on ringside position and what you saw and what you heard, your own internal subjective biases, any number of other factors, there can really be a lot of circumstances where a round can go to either fighter. This was not one of those fights. I had Marinez winning, I think, 8-4, essentially. Not only did he lose, one of the judges had it 118-110 for Romero. Now, Romero had moments in this fight, to be clear. He is heavy-handed. There were rounds he won quite cleanly, and when he did, he is certainly impressive. Make no mistake about it. But we knew Marinez had been in much longer fights, had a little bit more experience in that way, and it showed. It showed, BC. I am shocked at this result. First of all, how do you score it, and what do you make of what happened?
I had it 8-4 for Marinez. I thought 9-3 would have even been acceptable. I know our guy Steve Farhood on the Showtime broadcast had it 117-111. I thought that was a fair score the same way. Here's the brief defense I'll give of the judges. All right, 2 of the 3 of those guys, Don Trella, Glenn Feldman from Connecticut, known them a long time. They're 2 of the most respected judges in the game. The fact that it was unanimous does sort of tell you one thing. Maybe there were elements of it that we missed. Look, they're in that empty arena, whereas we found out from the UFC fights in the empty arenas, you hear the impact of the punches much more. So even though it seemed from our eyes that Rolando Romero was clearly outboxed and outclassed in some ways, you know, there's always the value that the fewer amount of punches he's landed may have had such a triggering effect ringside that they would score that more. But that's the last defense I'll sort of give them, because it seemed like everyone watching at that can see that this was a test to find out really how good is Rolly Romero 11, 12 fights into his career. And I think what we learned in the end was he's still aggressive, he's still got pop, but he needs to figure out some of these wrinkles. He needs this type of experience, these tough fights of somebody who can stretch him out and can, you know, make him work. And I thought he was following Marinez the whole fight and always seemingly a step behind. This was a breakout boxing performance for a young fighter in Jackson Marinez who hadn't really gotten his close-up yet. And instead, it's one of those sort of womp womp hashtag that's boxing moments where the younger, brighter fighter with the bigger following and maybe the, you know, quote unquote money guy A side gets the decision that most people don't think he deserved. You hate that in boxing because too often that becomes a regular thing in boxing where we don't even get mad at it because we're so used to seeing it. I'm trying to see it through the judge's eyes. Yes, this was an ugly fight in the second half, but I can watch that 2-3 more times, and I feel like I'm going to tell you Jackson Marinez was the better, slicker boxer, landed much more punches on the CompuBox side, and just looked like he controlled that ring for the 12 rounds. This isn't a death sentence for Romero. Obviously, it comes out with the win, but he does have to add more wrinkles and get more experience on this level.
I want to make a point here, and if I had not seen this study, I would be like everyone else. And I heard Steve Farhood say the same thing that you just said, which is, you know, some of these guys, I forget which judge that it was, had judged 1,000 boxing fights. Let me tell you how little I care about that. Major League Baseball did a study recently, and what they did was they looked at their umpiring crews, and they tried to evaluate, in terms of balls and strikes or various other calls that they could make, depending on their position, first and third base line, whatever, how good they were. Do you know which group ended up being and performing the worst? The answer is the group that had been there the longest. It turned out that if you had 20 plus years or more of experience at the major league level, not 20 years umpiring, 20 years as a major league umpire, they were by far the worst performers in terms of accurately identifying and being consistent with a strike zone among various other calls. It turned out that the most competent group were not the newest because they made errors as well, but it was somewhere in that 5 to 10 year range when they had enough experience on the job to begin to get through most of those errors that happen up front. That is the sweet spot. Let me tell you something. I don't think that there is any solution to this because we know the reality with boxing. Commissions circle the wagons. I'm sure these judges are nice people. I don't think that they're bad people. Don't misunderstand me. But this idea that because they have tenure that they deserve reverence, you need to throw that out the window. Because they have tenure, they have overstayed their welcome. That study from Major League Baseball was absolutely eye-opening for me. If there is not ongoing competency tests, and that does not come from judging fights, it comes independent of that. If there is not ongoing competency tests, I do not care about the argument that judges have been there a long time and therefore deserve our reverence. Either you can do the job effectively or you can't. And 118 to 110 for Romero is unbridled, matter-of-fact incompetence. And if it's not reviewed, shame on everybody in that commission and involved for not doing more about it. You took something from Jackson Marinez, a guy who has never had that many The wind has never been at his back in life for the most part, and he finally had a great opportunity to show something, and you stole it from him. You should be ashamed of yourselves, and you should do something about it. It makes me sick.
Yeah, wow. Look at this guy, Teddy Atlas, Luke Thomas over here. I love that.
I just can't,
look, I
dude,
think
it's just so ridiculous that these guys are nice guys and they've been there a long time. So what? They can't do the job anymore. Doesn't that matter? These are people's lives you're messing with.
Ageist right here. Wow. All
I
right,
haven't
in
slept.
full respect, you nailed it. I did want to say this. I think the other two judges were almost ruined by the egregiousness of I think it was Frank Lombardi, who had that 10 rounds to 2 for Rolly Romero. That gives the impression of impropriety. It gives the impression that it was written down before the fight even started. It reminds you of, CJ Ross scoring Mayweather Canelo even for Canelo. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's the same thing in Golovkin Canelo 1. Which we remember it as Triple G getting screwed. Yet the reality is, I thought Triple G won, but it was a close fight. And had all three of these judges, Luke, had it 7-5 for Romero, we could have sat here and talked about the difference between sitting ringside without social media, without a crowd, and all that. But when you have the shit of 118, 110. It smells, and everybody else smells for it, and it gives. I'm sorry, it screams, impropriety, and I hate that. I hate that about boxing.
I just don't want to hear this argument anymore that they've been there a long time and therefore we should genuflect. No, you've been there a long time. Prove you can still drive behind the wheel of the automobile, Grandpa. It's more along the lines of that. Last thing, Otto Wallin getting a win over Travis Kauffman, who injured his shoulder on a hook. Still, BC, Wallin was just too good for too long. It ended in an unfortunate circumstance. Obviously, I hope Kauffman's shoulder is okay, but he was, to me, never really in this fight.
No, he wasn't. And Kauffman retired afterwards and said beforehand, look, he's been in this game a long time. His dad's a promoter and trainer and all of that. If he couldn't win this and he lost twice in a row for the first time, he would retire. It seemed like the right move. Wallin did show you what he had to coming in, Luke, I thought, was that he is a top 10 legitimate title threat heavyweight. Again, we're never going to know until he gets in there again against the very elite whether that one night against Fury was the best he could be or just a tease in terms of how good he can do. But when you're 6'5.5", you're a southpaw, you've got speed, and you have an understanding of footwork and basic boxing, at its technical core, this guy's a player. And I love, again, the mean streak he showed against Tyson Fury. I thought he did what he had to do in this one, and there's nothing bad you can say about it.
Are you in?
This is our time. The world's changed, and you are right in the center of it.
I don't know what's ahead, but all bets are off.